said at the beginning, we celebrate the end of the Christmas season. This is sort of a schizophrenic day, the baptism of the Lord. It's the end of the Christmas season, but it's also really the first Sunday in Ordinary Time. Because when we come together next week to celebrate, we'll be celebrating the second Sunday in Ordinary Time. We've come from the Nativity only 3 weeks ago, through the Epiphany, and now to the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, where he's baptized in the Jordan by John. It's interesting, if you're a fan of going through the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, to see the similarities. You know, some of them tell the same events, maybe in a little different way. And that's, the little differences are interesting to sort of delve into. And there's a little difference in the Gospel today. In Matthew's Gospel, when we have this scene, Jesus being baptized in the Jordan, God the Father, when heaven is rent open, God the Father says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." As if he's sort of announcing Jesus to the world. This is him. Take a look. Here he is. A little different in Mark and in Luke. It's the one we hear today. God changes the pronoun, changes the not the meaning, but the thrust of what he's saying. You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased. He's speaking directly to Christ. Not announcing him, but speaking to him. And while he's at prayer, after his baptism, not the minute that he rises above the water. I can't think of a more consoling answer to a prayer than those words from God. And thankfully, because of the effects of our baptism, those words are meant for us too. We're God's children. We're beloved sons and daughters with whom he is well pleased. It's in our baptism that we receive our call. You know, not just priests and religious and deacons have calls, have vocations. We're coming up to celebrate Vocation Awareness Week, starts today, actually. But every Christian has a vocation. And it begins in our baptism. We're called to be disciples of Christ. So I thought, well, what better time of year? It's only a couple weeks after the New Year. Hopefully, our resolutions are still shiny and new. I won't tell you about mine. I hope yours are still shiny and new. But I think it's a good time to reflect on our shared vocation. This vocation we receive from our baptism. It's common to all the baptized. It's not a special province of those who are ordained or those who have taken vows. How are we doing as disciples of Christ? It's worth asking. Not just at the New Year, but this is a good time to do it. Cardinal Newman asked the question this way. He said, what difference does being a Christian make in the way we live out our daily lives? It doesn't make any difference. Hopefully it does. Because our call to discipleship in our baptism, it calls us to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Because Christianity isn't just about a list of, here's how to live, here's the rules you have to follow and you're going to be a Christian. Christianity is about how to live, about living out that relationship with Christ in our lives, not just following a list of do's and don'ts. So our faith has to be manifest in our lives. Catherine DeHoek Doherty, who I think is a blessed now, she was a founder of a community called Madonna House. She said this. She said, don't bother proclaiming what you believe unless you act accordingly. I got sent an interesting little video on Facebook the other day. It's geared toward young adults, and it's this young woman. It's not made very well, but the script is very interesting. The premise of the whole thing is, if Catholicism were outlawed, if it was illegal to be a Catholic, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And she's struggling with that, because she says she's a Catholic. But, well, I don't always go to Mass. I don't pray. You know. So it's worth looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, if all of a sudden Catholicism was illegal, is there enough evidence to convict me of being a Catholic? Can people know that I'm a Christian by how I live? And when I talk about, vocation isn't just something we need to talk about it in relation to priests and deacons and religious. But that's not the only area we need to talk about vocation in, because those are just a group of specialized vocations. Like I said, everybody has a vocation. We're called wherever we're at in the world. So it doesn't matter what we do for a living, whether we're a librarian or a truck driver, or we work in a store, we work in a fast food restaurant, or we're a waiter or waitress or a dishwasher. God calls us where we are, and in whatever we do for a living, to be Christians, to be Christ in the world. So there are all sorts of ways to serve Christ, depending on what our station in life is, where we're at. And it's something that is never over. It's a lifelong vocation. It's a lifelong challenge. So we need these times where we stop, we take a minute, we think about our life as a Christian, our vocation as a Christian, and we ask God, honestly, how am I doing? And we listen for an answer. Our baptism brings us that knowledge that we're always going to be God's beloved. That through our baptism we're swept up into that mystery of Christ. We're swept up into his dying and rising because we've died and risen with him through our baptism. And we're called to continue to preach that, to live out that mystery, to make the mystery of Christ dying and rising visible in our world. As individuals and as a community, we're called to do that. So, this time of year, it's a good time to say, how am I doing with my baptismal call, Father? How am I doing living out the mystery of Christ's sacrifice each day? And we have to remind ourselves as well, let ourselves know, that if in doing that we get discouraged, we get tired, we get angry, we have to remember those words from the gospel today. Remember the Father's words to Christ, because they're for us as well. You are my beloved children. With you I am well pleased.